Chapter 4 Spirited Away. June 30th, 2060. Somewhere in the American wastes. Very slowly, Akira regained consciousness. Every inch of her body hurt. When she opened her eyes, there was nothing to see. Akira then found out that her hands were tied behind her back, and she was blindfolded. To make matters even worse, Akira could distinctly feel a cold metal object affixed to the back of her own head. 2 prongs pressed into her temples painfully, adding to her distress. After another moment, Akira realized something else. She was in a moving vehicle. Judging from the deep rumble of the engine and the warm air moving around her, Akira was sitting in the bed of an open-top truck, one that was traveling across rough terrain. Instinctively, she raised her voice and cried out, "Hello? Can someone help me?" There was a flurry of movement to Akira's left, and a moment later, something very hard hit her in the head, and she recoiled, screaming. "Shut up, girl!" a harsh voice snapped. "Now!" Akira whimpered, and she was struck again, this time across the face. She bit her tongue, literally, and held her breath. Whoever was beating her finally backed off. "Keep it quiet," the man's voice grumbled. A moment later, the sound of the truck engine and the wind was all Akira could hear again. Reeling in pain, Akira sobbed silently for a few minutes until she felt a stranger lean on her left shoulder. "Are you okay, young child?" A female voice spoke with a French accent, just barely loud enough to be heard over the truck engine. "At least, I think you sound like a child." "I think I'm okay," Akira whispered. "Who are you? What's going on?" "I'm called Siajotso," replied the woman's voice. "I was trying to return to my home when they took me." "Where's home for you?" Akira asked. "I'm from Myron, a little town in Kansas." The woman named Siajotso chuckled. "I lived in California for most of my life. I was traveling alone when these thugs took me." "So we've been kidnapped?" Akira could just barely sense the movement as Siajotso nodded her head. "Yes, and there's 2 more of us here. Pascal's on my right, and I think Dave is on your other side." Akira flexed her shoulder, trying to get a reaction from whoever was on her right. "Leave me alone," said the voice of a teenage boy. He sounded to be roughly the same age as Akira. As quietly as they could, without incurring the wrath of whoever was guarding them, the other 3 prisoners introduced themselves to Akira. Ingrid Siajotso was a 50-year-old Malagasy woman who had been kidnapped while trying to return to Madagascar, her homeland. David Sepulveda was a 15-year-old Mexican-American boy who lived in a small community on the Rio Grande River, and he'd been snatched from his bed in the middle of the night. Pascal Etienne was a blind man, native to French Canada. He was traveling to XCOM headquarters in Myron, pursuing a rumor that someone there would be able to restore his eyesight. Instead, the people who offered to give him a ride had kidnapped him. All 4 victims, Akira included, were blindfolded and tied up. But from the information they were able to share, it was apparent there were just 3 kidnappers: Bernard von Unfall, a second German man, and a woman from New Zealand. Akira was glad to know all of this, but she still didn't have the answer to the question that was bugging her the most. Why, though? Why are they doing this? "No idea," Pascal admitted. "You got me," David replied. "Who knows?" Ingrid said. Thinking hard, Akira asked if anyone had seen von Unfall pointing a strange device at them, taking great care to describe the thing he used in Myron. Obviously, Pascal Etienne never saw such a thing, but David and Ingrid did. "I thought it looked like a Geiger counter," Ingrid whispered. "You know, the thing they use to measure radiation." "So they kidnap radioactive people?" David snarked. Then he spoke loudly enough for the kidnapper to hear. "Wow, you guys really are morons!" Immediately, there was a shuffling sound from the other side of the truck bed as kidnapper number 2 stood up and bashed David's head with something. The boy cried out in pain as the kidnapper yelled, "Shut up! Keep quiet!" Akira and the others fell silent. No matter what she thought about all of this, Akira realized that she was in a completely hopeless situation. She was blindfolded, tied up, and had some device strapped to the back of her head that did Jericho knows what. She was screwed. The kidnappers would just keep driving until sunrise, take shelter in the daytime, and carry on until... Until what? Until rescue came? Was that even possible? The last Akira had seen of her father, he was lying flat on the ground. She didn't even know if he was alive. And as for her mother, Akira didn't know what happened to her. And that was somehow even worse than the sight of Blake lifeless on the ground. Full of fear, Akira tried to speak to her captor again. "Where are you taking us? What are you going to do to us?" The answer came in the form of something solid striking her in the face. The kidnappers drove on for a few more hours. Eventually, Akira felt an oppressive heat that suggested the sun was rising. As soon as dawn broke, the kidnappers pulled off the road and forced all 4 of their victims to disembark. Still blindfolded, Akira felt someone grab her by the arm and force her to walk for a short while. She was brought inside of a building and made to sit down in what felt like a dusty corner. Kidnapper number 2 again demanded the prisoners be silent. It was around then when Akira finally heard the voice of the 3rd kidnapper for the first time. "How old are you, girl?" She spoke in a thick New Zealand accent. Akira couldn't help but imagine this woman as one of the Partogans she read about in stories of the Second Hyperspace War. She didn't reply. "Girl, your age!" the Kiwi kidnapper snapped. "You told me to be quiet," Akira mumbled. Once again, Akira was hit in the head, but this time she was expecting the blow and figured out exactly what she was being beaten with. It was the stock of a gun. She was dreading the confirmation, but now she had a much better appreciation for the situation she was in. Reluctantly, Akira said, 15. I'm 15. The Kiwi kidnapper let out a gasp. 15? You're bloody kidding. Ryder, are you seeing these numbers? The voice of Bernard von Unfall replied, sounding stunned. I see them. Not sure I believe them. Is that even possible for one so young? Scan her again, said the voice of kidnapper number 2. Even though she had some fabric over her eyes, Akira got the sense that she knew what was going on. The kidnappers were scanning their victims with the same device Akira saw von Unfall using in Myron's trade center, the one Ingrid compared to a Geiger counter. In her mind's eye, Akira could just see the handheld sensor being passed over her body while the kidnappers looked at the little screen. Unbelievable, said kidnapper number 2. The numbers go right off the edge of the screen. In terms of energy output, she's just below Jericho on the scale, von Unfall breathed. If my math is right, that comes out to around 150 petajoules. There was an audible shuffle as all 3 kidnappers backed away from Akira. To her shock, she also felt a subtle reaction from Ingrid. The Malagasy woman inched away from her, just a little, but enough to notice. Akira, for her part, was confused. She knew that joules were used to measure energy, but she couldn't comprehend a petajoule. It was beyond her. Akira's ignorance of the situation was partially lifted when the Kiwi kidnapper said in a terrified whisper, This girl's a freaking nuke! A big one, too! A hydrogen bomb that walks and talks! Akira's breath caught in her throat. She was simultaneously confused and terrified by having the label walking and talking bomb attached to her. She's worth more than the other 3 combined, kidnapper number 2 said. I'm going to call Boston, said von Unfall. We're not delivering her to anyone until we get paid the right amount. Akira, David, Ingrid, and Pascal were all forced to their feet and made to walk into a place that felt dark and chilly. Still blindfolded, they were made to eat a foul-smelling paste and then, one by one, The victims were allowed to visit and make use of a bathroom that smelled even worse. It was the first time all day that Akira had her blindfold removed and hands untied. But in that brief moment, all she could figure out was that they were inside of an old-world restaurant, which could have been anywhere. During the few minutes she had alone in the bathroom, Akira used her fingernails to hastily carve the XCOM insignia into the backside of a stall door, the letter X with 3 stars above it. Then she added her own initials, A.J.R. In the dark, cold room, Akira and the others were finally left alone, and they could talk freely. The first words out of her mouth were, "Okay, what the hell is going on here? Who are these people? Where are they taking us?" Pascal and David both shook their heads. "None of this makes any sense to me," David said. "I just want to go home." Ingrid, however, was totally silent. Unable to see, Akira had to call out to check if she was still in the room. "I'm here," Ingrid said. I'm in shock." "Why?" asked Pascal. "You figure out what's happening here?" "I think I did," Ingrid replied. "I just don't want it to be true." Akira leaned forward, the better to hear Ingrid's theory. "Has anyone here ever, have any of you ever heard things? Like voices?" "No," Akira and David said together. "Occasionally I think I heard someone speak to me," Pascal said, "but when I reply, they claim they haven't said anything." Ingrid let out a sharp gasp. "And have any of you seen something really weird happen? Something you couldn't explain?" Pause. "I had a premonition that came true," David said. I dreaded an earthquake, and it happened the next day. Wrecked the town." Ingrid said something in French that sounded like a prayer, invoking the name of the sacred girl. "What?" Pascal and Akira gasped. "What is it?" Ingrid's voice shook as she voiced her realization. It's the gift. I think we're all gifted. That would explain why they took us." "What?" Pascal breathed. "Impossible," David muttered. "Are you sure?" Akira whispered. "Very," Ingrid replied. "I remember when I was young, someone once told me that psionic energy is measured in joules, and during the war, special sensors and scanners could detect it. That thing they were using must be one." Akira was locked in a daze, barely able to comprehend the weight of what she just heard. The gift. From a young age, Akira had heard all about it. Her parents would often discuss it in their weekly history lessons. The gift is a catch-all term used to describe psionic powers. Telepathy, telekinesis, pyrokinesis, any supernatural ability fueled by mental willpower. She remembered what she knew about other famous gifted people. Corey Tucker, an XCOM operative who served as the commander of the Bushranger. Hadn't he once beat someone in a fight without lifting a finger? All it took was a stare, and the opposing man fell to his knees, cowed. Then there was Corey's shipmate, Dwayne Gardner. Akira had actually seen him reading the minds of his friends. Once, Dwayne humiliated Akira's sister by looking into her mind, seeing her crush on a certain someone, and then revealing her secret feelings to everybody in the room. Her own mother, Chihiro, had used her own gift during the war. Whenever Akira talked to veterans, she would hear the stories of how her mother deflected bullets and forced powerful aliens to submit to her will. And of course, there was Jericho, the girl who killed the gods, the woman who saved the galaxy. Every time Akira and her family ventured into one of the few megacities that were still standing, they would see the famous photographs and videos of Jericho, filling digital screens and hologram projectors everywhere. Akira's favorite image of Jericho was a 4-second video of her fighting in battle. In the clip, Jericho put one hand to her own chest and seemed to pull a flickering blue light right out of her own heart before throwing the soul fire towards an enemy. Akira, Pascal, Ingrid, and David were all in the same boat. None of them knew they were gifted until they were kidnapped, and it was becoming increasingly clear that wherever they were going, they would be exploited upon arrival. The foursome agreed to an escape pact. The instant an opportunity rose, they would try to get away. Taking their chances in the wastes was a far more preferable outcome than whatever fate was awaiting at the end of this journey. Akira wasn't sure how long she and her companions were left alone in the room that felt like a cellar, but eventually she did fall asleep, dreaming of escape plans. July 1st, 2060. Somewhere in the American wastes. Sometime later, Akira was violently shaken awake. One of the kidnappers seized her by the arm and forced her to her feet. There was a deep thudding sound coming through the walls. An aircraft was parked outside of the building, its engine running. The Kiwi kidnapper told Akira to be quiet and walk. She, Ingrid, Pascal, and David were made to walk out of the building and into the overpowering heat of the early morning. Still blindfolded, Akira and company were brought aboard and made to sit down in some uncomfortable seats. Each person was belted in place with a 5-point harness and ordered to remain still for the journey. For several hours, Akira didn't perceive anything besides the noise of engines. There was no way to know what direction they were flying, and the interior of the craft was air-conditioned, making it impossible to know if it was day or night. There was nothing she could do but wait. After what felt like 5 or 6 hours, the aircraft nosed down and started to descend. Akira felt the gentle thump of tires on a runway, and before she could get her bearings again, Akira was forced to her feet and made to disembark. The very first thing she noticed when she stepped outside was the air. Ever since Akira was a small child, she knew nothing but hot and dry air. She could count on one hand the number of times she'd felt the ambient temperature fall below 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So when Akira stepped out into this new location, she immediately began to shiver violently and think, "Oh, I'm gonna freeze!" Wherever Akira had just arrived, it was cold. Very cold. In fact, the temperature here was about 70 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest Akira had ever been in her life. Her whole body began to shiver and quake uncontrollably. Pascal, Ingrid, and David couldn't stop their teeth from chattering loudly. As the engines spooled down, von Unfall's voice could be heard again. "I've got 4 more for you, Sally Ann." A woman's voice, full of friendliness and joy, replied, "Oh, thank you, Bernard, and welcome back, Klaus and Sarah. The boss insists you guys stay a while and recover. It must have been rough out there in America." Then the woman named Sally Ann turned her attention to the captives. "Oh, Bernard, those aren't necessary anymore. They're safe here." "Have it your way," Bernard replied. "They're all yours. We're going to talk to the boss and get our payment." Akira felt a woman's hand grab her arm, and she was steered away from the group. After walking for a few minutes, the woman made Akira stop. Then the blindfold finally came off. Akira's eyes were assaulted by light and color. There was so much green in her field of vision that she thought she'd gone blind. Sally Ann quickly stepped in front of Akira and gently took her by the shoulders. Akira found Sally Ann's appearance to be extremely off-putting. Sally Ann was an American woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. She was also obscenely beautiful, to the point where Akira wondered if this was her natural appearance. However, Sally Ann did have one feature that definitely was not natural. Her smile. There was something horribly wrong with the big, toothy grin plastered across the strange woman's face. There was nothing genuine about it. No, this smile wasn't being forced. Akira could see that. It was a hollow kind of smile, as though there was nothing behind it. There were no lights in Sally Ann's eyes. Instead, her eyes seemed to be glossed over and glassy. Akira's mother once said that the eyes were the window to the soul. Well, Akira could see straight through Sally Ann's window, and on the other side, there was no soul to be found. Sally Ann might be walking and talking and smiling, but her eyes gave away the fact that she might as well be dead on the inside. "Calm down, girl," Sally Ann said in a gentle voice. "It's okay. You're safe now. Nobody is going to hurt you." "But your friends kidnapped me!" Akira's voice cracked. She was on the verge of sobbing. "They stole me!" "Don't be silly," Sally Ann admonished Akira in a friendly voice. "You've been rescued. Those horrible people aren't going to hurt you anymore." "What?" Akira was incredulous. "You're out of your mind. I was kidnapped. They stole me." "You're still being silly," Sally Ann countered in a cheerful, sing-song voice. "Von Unfall told us about those people holding you, about how horrible they were, parading you around a trade center at sword point, offering your body to older men for a price. You don't have to defend them anymore. They're never going to hurt you again. That cruel, disgusting Robinson man can't hurt you anymore. You're safe." Akira took a step back. Did Sally Ann really think she was going to buy any of this? "You're horrible. You're talking about my family." "Oh, do try to think, Akira," Sally Ann replied, her voice even and cool. "How could they be your family? Did they ever care for you? Were you ever happy?" Akira tried to speak, but found she was having trouble getting words from her brain to her mouth. She knew what she wanted to say. She wanted to rage and curse at Sally Ann for trying to brainwash her into thinking the kidnapping was something else, anything else. But for some reason, Akira's anger and rage was being sapped away as soon as it came to her. She just couldn't sustain her own fury. Finally, Akira found a tiny speck of rage in the back of her mind. Mentally, she seized onto it and held tight. "You people abducted me!" Akira shouted at Sally Ann. "You hurt my family, and... It was gone as quickly as it came. Now Akira just felt tired and sick. She didn't have the strength to stand, let alone fight. Sally Ann, for her part, never stopped smiling. As Akira's legs buckled, she collapsed into Sally Ann's outstretched arms. She stroked Akira's hair with a reassuring hand and said, "Just take a deep breath and try to think of all the stuff in the past as a nightmare, as a bad dream. You don't have to think about those terrible people anymore. Breathe with me. Deep breath." Akira complied, taking a deep breath of air through her nose. Not only was the air cooler here than in Kansas, it smelled differently too. The air of this place was pleasant and sweet, and it reminded Akira of the quaint little candy shop run by Sophie and Sophia Ackerman in Brazil. For reasons Akira didn't know, each time she took a breath of the sweet air, she felt a little more relaxed. Her heart rate and breathing slowed, and her mind was no longer racing. She was finally able to look around and properly process what she was seeing. Akira and Sally Ann were standing outside the entrance of an airport, built on the shores of a tropical island. Akira knew that such places used to exist in the past, but she had no idea any of these islands were still around in her own lifetime. To her left, Akira spotted a small town nestled between two ridges that were covered in lush green trees. A mountain, also covered in forest, rose up in the distance. To her right, an ocean of crashing waves loomed large, going on as far as Akira could see. A large complex of hyper-modern buildings occupied the space between the airport and the town. There was one other thing. For the very first time in her life, Akira was standing in direct sunlight. Without any kind of protection, Akira could feel the light hitting her skin, but was perplexed to see that she wasn't being burned. In any other situation, she would have screamed and then run for overhead cover in a panic. But there was some strange property about this place, about the sweet air, that suppressed Akira's fight or flight response. Instead, she looked calmly at Sally Ann and asked, "How come we aren't being burned by the sun?" Akira's voice was softer and weaker now. "We are protected here," Sally Ann replied calmly. "Isn't it wonderful?" Sally Ann and Akira both took another great big lungful of that wonderful sweet air. Akira tried to think of her family, wondering what they must be thinking right now. But no matter how hard she focused her mind, Akira found that she was drawing a great big blank. The thoughts just weren't coming to her. About 5 miles away, Bernard von Unfall and his 2 accomplices were welcomed into a grand-looking office building in the downtown area. Klaus Eberhard, who was the other German, was very anxious and kept close to his comrades. Sarah Harris, the New Zealander, shared his concerns. "I don't like this place," Klaus told his friends. "We should leave." "I agree," Bernard replied. "We'll get our payment and be off as quick as we can." 2 armed guards waved Bernard's team through a door, giving the trio a pair of off-putting smiles that caused Sarah to get goosebumps. On the other side, they found an opulent office. Red and gold carpets matched the drapes on the windows, while elaborate oil paintings adorned the walls. A throne-like chair sat behind a magnificent wooden desk. The desk and chair behind it were adorned with the same symbol, a red hexagonal eye. However, the man who occupied that chair spoiled the imposing look of the place by grinning and laughing like a schoolchild when the trio came into the room. "Von Unfall, you did it!" A man in his late middle ages rose from the desk and threw his arms around Bernard. If the trio did not already know this man's identity, they would have been very hard-pressed to believe that this was Xiaoji Zhang, who had once been a notorious member of the Chinese criminal underworld. "Well done, von Unfall, getting the Robinson girl," Zhang continued. "I've been wanting her ever since the first scouts detected her potential. But you pulled it off. I can't tell you how happy you've made me, and I dare say a payment is in order." Zhang reached into his pocket and produced 3 slips of paper. He passed them out to each member of von Unfall's crew. "Give these to the bank teller across the street," Zhang said. "And after that, why not stay a while? You've earned some time relaxing in the sun, after all. Enjoy yourselves while you're here." Bernard, Sarah, and Klaus left Zhang's office quickly and made their way to the bank. They had absolutely no intention of staying. As they left the building, they all got another whiff of that sweet air. "Ugh, why does this place smell so off?" Sarah grumbled. "And why are those people just smiling at us like that?" Klaus added. Everywhere they looked, people were staring at the trio with those dead, soulless smiles. It seemed as though the city was populated by androids or mannequins. Bernard, Klaus, and Sarah decided to fast walk to their destination. As they moved, they took faster and deeper breaths, inhaling more and more of the strange, sweet air. After about 30 seconds, all 3 people started to get the sensation of brain fog. Their thoughts were just a little clouded, a little muddled. When they got into the bank, Klaus Eberhard was embarrassed as he handed the receipt to a teller and completely forgot the name of the person who gave it to him. Sarah thought this was so funny that she laughed uncontrollably for a good 5 minutes, only stopping when her sides began to hurt. Eventually, all 3 of the kidnappers got their reward money and left the bank. Instead of making a beeline for the airport, they just stood there on the city street, looking lost. Finally, Bernard asked the others, isn't there something we were supposed to be doing? Weren't we going somewhere? Sarah asked. Not sure. I think we got distracted by how beautiful this place is, Klaus finished. The trio started to wander aimlessly through the coastal town, moving away from the airport. They took big, long, relaxing breaths, enjoying the sweet air, and slowly their faces were overtaken by a great smile, full of contentment, devoid of life.